everyone, my name is Kayla and welcome back to Kay's Hidden Shelf, where we talk about books. Today's video is a little different. Back in the fall of last year, I had done some experimenting with spraying book edges at home. The goal of this was to see if I could do it for cheap. If someone like myself who is more crafty rather than handy can still go out to the hardware store, come home with a few things, and could spice up my used dingy books or books that I loved and just wanted to add a sprayed edge to. Personally, I love sprayed edging on books, if you could not tell from my bookshelf, and there are a lot of different ways that you can look at doing this. I personally wanted to try first and foremost what is the most cost-effective and accessible way of doing this. So this video is going to break down those attributes in the examples that I have for you here. I did try two different things and it didn't get quite the result I was hoping for, but that's likely on my end as well. We're going to break it down. So without further ado, let's dive into this. First of all, why do this? Like I said, I love sprayed edging on books, but there was another reason to it. I often get used copies of books and they've seen better days. A good example of this is my copy of Dr. Zhivago. And this is kind of the dust jacket has seen better days. It's at the point where it's so dried out that it is crumbling when you touch it, but also the edges of the book are pretty yellowed, and I've already tried one fix that didn't quite work. There's also staining on this, and I wanted to see if there was some way I could easily fix this at home just to brighten it up, give it some new life. And yes, these books do have their own charm to them. And if you love that charm, by all means, keep the book the way it is. But if you're like me, and while I do have a specific love for that charm in books, they usually come from books that I have read and loved personally and have seen that wear and tear in my own home. When I buy it secondhand, I don't mind fixing it up a bit. These stains, all of these yellowed pages aren't memories that I've built with the book. That is the previous owner of the book. And so while this might have its own charm to it, this to me is a blank canvas that I can maybe spruce up a bit, and potentially down the line I would love to try it with this book, not only spraying the edges, but also replacing the dust jacket. As I mentioned, it's quite brittle and dried out and ripped and stained. And of course, I'm not anticipating this project to get anywhere near the level of quality of the designed sprayed edges, the digitally sprayed edges on my bookshelf. Those are completely different. You need a whole set of machinery. And yes, you can get stenciled images on the sprayed edging, but these are completely different. For the most part, those are digitally sprayed edges by a production company, and that's not what we're going to be looking at today. What I tried to do was just get a single color, just to get some of that yellowing out of the pages on the ends and just spruce up the book a little bit. Now, you can accomplish this with an airbrush. You can buy those on Amazon, but like I said, I just wanted to see if I could accomplish this in a decent enough way that I was happy with just by going to my local Home Depot. And that's just a home hardware store. You can get all kinds of stuff there, but I just went in, grabbed some spray paint, and used some newspaper that showed up in my mailbox. Again, I wanted this to be easy, accessible, and while it might not be perfect, did it meet the goal that I had, which was sprucing it up? And I would say yes, but Amazon is pretty accessible, so why didn't I go with an airbrush? Well, looking at the reviews in terms of Amazon Canada, the airbrushes I was able to find on there had questionable reviews. Some people absolutely adored it, while others ran into a lot of technical difficulties and problems, and things just wouldn't work. And I think this put me off a bit. Again, I wanted something easy, accessible. Airbrushes, like anything, have different levels of quality to them. You can get really good quality ones, or you can get affordable ones that might have issues. Personally, I wanted something that was quick and accessible, easy to try at home, and not a new piece of machinery or tech or device that I needed to learn how to use and potentially problem solve any mechanical malfunctions. And of course, I just didn't want something else cluttering my home. That was another part of it. Spray paint often gets used in our home, whether it's from projects, crafting, or anything else that comes up. But that's something that I can foresee our household using again, whereas an airbrush seemed like a one and done kind of product until I knew whether or not spraying edges of books at home would be worthwhile to invest more into. Again, this is a hobby. We're doing this for fun. So how did I do this, and what will you need? Well, the only thing I really needed to get from Home Depot was the spray paint, and that might not be the case for you. In addition to the spray paint, you will also need 2 large pieces of plywood to ensure that you can put that book together tightly between clamps. Ideally, you want 4 clamps to keep the pages and the wood tight together. In my case, I ended up using 2 clamps and a workhorse. Again, if you have things at home for this, great. If not, don't go and buy something super expensive. You can find them secondhand, or you can also find some more affordable versions at your local hardware store. You'll also need some painter's tape and newspaper to cover any part of the book that you don't want to be colored by the spray paint. In terms of doing this process, well, I recommend you practice a little bit. If you've never used spray paint before, you're not sure how it works on paper, on the edges of a book, go out and get some used copies or cheap copies of books in some form or way. There's used bookstores, little libraries, or scavenge your own shelves for books that you are planning to unhaul anyway. These are great ways to test the spray painting process before you do this. You can also test spray painting on a flat object, just like the plywood, for example. You can just do some test sprays to get a feel for it. To sum up, do not use your brand new book that you just bought, that you absolutely love. Maybe leave some of the newer books on your shelf, and if you get really good at this, maybe down the line you can think about spraying the edges on those. In the meantime, keep 2 used copies, keep 2 copies of books that you're not too worried about messing up if it doesn't work out quite the way you thought. At this point, you should have your book of choice as well as the supplies mentioned. From here, you're going to start by wrapping any sections of the books that you don't want to be painted. This often includes the front, back cover, and spine, and you can use the green painter's tape to cover up any additional areas that the newspaper might not have gotten. The great part with painter's tape is that it's not meant to be damaging. However, do be careful because it's still tape, and you're putting this on paper, on material that can it can be finicky. So just be careful with the tape. Next, you'll be clamping the book in between those pieces of plywood, and you're going to be putting a clamp on each corner. Now, you can shift the clamps around a little bit as you're painting the sides of the book. I don't recommend shifting them too much. Make sure you keep that tension on. But if you have the type of clamps that do move and you're struggling to get one side or another, you can shift it around just by slightly moving it and being very careful when you do so. You can also spray it in sections. So you can spray one side, let it dry, move the clamps, and repeat the process. Personally, I don't have patience for that, so I just went ahead and shifted the clamps very carefully in order to continue painting the edges. In terms of spraying, please move quickly. This is where some practice is needed, because if you stay too long in one section of the edge of the paper, it's really going to saturate and make it look darker. You can kind of see here where that happened for me. I just wasn't quick enough here, and I was trying to get multiple layers because there was one spot that was not getting any color, but you can definitely see it's a bit darker here. I hope you can see that on camera anyway. You want to keep the motion quick, and you want to keep the paint as light as you can without oversaturating the pages. Really, this is a quick learning curve, but it does take practice. By the time I finished this one, my second experiment actually went much better in terms of spraying it more evenly on the pages. Again, it's just something that needs practice, so don't be too hard on yourself if it doesn't work out great the first time. If you got stuck in one spot like I did, it's okay. This is why we're using old copies, secondhand copies, to practice on. After you've sprayed the edges, you're going to let that dry, and that drying time is going to vary depending on your climate and all of those factors. Once it dries, you can begin taking it out of the clamps and start by slowly separating the pages. They will stick a little bit, so try and do this page by page. Be careful, but in all honesty, the reason why I like the spray painting is that it actually doesn't stick that much. I was surprised by how quickly and easily the pages came apart with spray painting. I've seen other examples done with acrylic paints and paints that you can get at the dollar store, typically used on canvas, for example. And those you have to be extremely careful with. As that kind of paint is thicker, you're actually much more likely to rip the pages, and they do stick a lot more as far as I've seen from other videos. I haven't personally tested it out, and the reason I haven't tested out that kind of paint is it doesn't seem ideal. I might do it just to do a comparison of this, but from the pros and cons that I've weighed out and watched from other videos, it doesn't seem ideal in comparison. Maybe I'll do a test. Leave a comment down below if I should. In this case, it comes apart pretty easy. Just still be mindful that you don't rip any of the pages if they do stick together. And voila, you're done. It's pretty simple, especially if you're just doing one color like I did here. Now, you can get fancier. Like I said, you can go out and get that airbrush, mix up some colors. You can spray half a color and the other half a different color. But if you also have other products like a Cricut, for example, I hope I'm pronouncing that properly, you can actually print out stencils and get some artwork on the sides. I've seen people do this for the Fourth Wing, I believe, where they missed out on the sprayed edging special edition, and they just did their own stenciling and spray painting at home to get the same imagery. At the end of the day, doing it that way with the airbrushing and the Cricut and stencils is just a way to make room for more creativity and get some more customization in there. The downside of this is it does come at an additional cost. I opted not to do this despite some of the pros that it would give me. It's so expensive to buy a Cricut, and if you already have one, fantastic. Go for it, because I think it would make some beautiful designs on books, and you can get as creative as you like, and you can experiment in so many different ways. The other downside is time. In terms of getting that creative and getting some more complexity into doing the designs on the sprayed edging, it's going to take more time, not just practically applying it, but the learning curves on how to use all of it, the airbrush and the Cricut, for example. And the other example I have here is the black edging, and like I said, this one I did something a little bit different. For the Ruin of Kings, I just went in with red spray paint, but for Harry Potter and the Cursed Child, I actually went in with a clear coat first. Now, this could just be me, but I didn't notice a whole lot of difference. The whole reason behind the clear coating was to prevent some of the bleeding that does happen on the pages of the book from the spray paint. It probably was more a user error in this case. While I put the clear coat on first, I could have let it dry a bit longer, I think. There were sections that weren't fully dry, and due to the weather, it was about to rain and I needed to get my setup inside. I ended up rushing with spraying the second coat on when I probably could have been more patient. I did get some bleeding, but not as bad as the Ruin of Kings, so I would like to attempt that again with the clear coat to see if it works better. For me personally, I think this was worth it. It gave me a bit of a creative outlet while sprucing up some of my older books that had seen better days. And I'm pretty happy with the results overall. The first pro, and I'm going to put the pros with the cons just because they kind of go hand in hand. The first being cost effective. it is cost effective, for me at least. I only had to go out and spend about $20 worth of spray paint. Everything else I had at home, and it only took a few hours of time, and most of that time was drying. It maybe took about 2 hours to 3 hours to dry, and personally, I might have given it a bit more time if I wasn't so impatient. But the con being, it could be expensive for you. If you have to go out and buy all of the supplies, including the clamp, plywood, etc., it's going to be much more costly than it was for me. If you already have the supplies, great, but if not, just keep in mind there is a bit more expense there. Another pro is that you are giving new life to a old book. You're sprucing it up, you're making it look a little bit more modern, a little bit brighter, adding some color to the sprayed edging. Do you have to do this? No. By all means, you don't have to. For me, this was just a way to experiment a little bit with my books, the secondhand books that I buy, and you might be perfectly happy with your old books and their character and love from a previous owner. That is perfectly fine. If you are happy with your books the way they are, great. If you want to experiment like I did, this might be a fun outlet to try. But it's not perfect, like I said. I did find that the spray paint did bleed through the pages, less so on the book that I did with the clear coat first. And while I would like to attempt that clear coat properly again, I'm not as hopeful it will work. Just in preventing that bleeding on the pages, I think that's just the nature of paint on pages. I am skeptical I can get it to work at home, but I do want to experiment, so maybe I will make a part 2 or an update to this if I can get it to work. Another pro is you can get creative. You can add as many colors to this. You can get the more advanced tools to do this, like the airbrush and the Cricut, to make this as creative and beautiful as you like. It's all up to you. There is quite a range here that you can go through, and I think that part would be really fun for some readers out there. The biggest con out of all of this, though, is you could mess up the book, which is why I say pick a used copy you are not attached to, that you don't care if you make a mistake or mess up. There is room for error, there is room for mistake, and you can make the book not nice. You could put too much paint in one area, it really bleeds through. You can make a mistake with the covering in the newspaper and spray a section of the book you did not want painted. There is room for error, and keeping that in mind, I think, is the biggest part that will help you in the end if you choose to do this yourself. The big question: would I do this again? Just for myself, not for videos, not to share with all of you, not for experimenting, just for myself and my own bookshelf. And in thinking on the pros and cons, I think I would. This is such an easy way to upgrade my books, to add some color and pop to my shelves, and just to give some new personality to old books that have kind of lost their luster. For me, that is appealing. I enjoyed the process of doing it. I'm also the kind of person who picks up multiple hobbies. I am a jack of all trade and a master of none. Would I pick up an airbrush and make it a little bit more complex with the Cricut and stenciling? That I'm hesitant on. I don't mind the single color. It was quick, it was easy to do, and the complexity that comes with a Cricut and the airbrushing, that would take more experimenting and time that I currently don't have. Personally, I'm happy with the single color. I could have even gone one half black and the other half red, for example, to add a little bit of a mix. But at the end of the day, I think this was fun, and I would love to see about sprucing up some of the other books that are on my shelves. Would I do it to a brand new book that I just bought? Maybe if I got really good at it. But yes, this is something I would like to continue trying just for my own personal enjoyment and to see if I can get better at it. That's also a big part of it as well. I'd love to know though, was this video helpful for you? Would you try something like this? And do you think it was worth it? Leave your comments down below. I always love hearing from you. As always, thank you so much for watching and take care of yourselves.